Hello, welcome back to a new video. Today I want to do a bit of a tutorial on how to get better at Trailmakers. Just like, I'm going to go over like a bunch of things that I think will help new players and maybe even like old-time players, you know. There's always more to learn about this game. So yeah, let's get into it. Imagine this. So this is the first time you boot up the game and you hop onto Sandbox, onto Danger Zone, and well, that's kind of it. What do you do? There's a few things you want to start with. Like, you want to decide on a few things first. Like, what do you want to build? The first thing you have to decide is, do you want to make either a replica, or you can make something from your own imagination. So, you know, or like a spaceship or a land vehicle. That's the things you have to decide first. Now, I myself mainly build aircraft, and that's like replicas, and that's just the thing I do. So I'm not going to walk through on how I like build a plane. So here you can see a frog foot that is still in progress. You know, it's starting to shape up pretty good. There's still a few things I need to do. This is a build that is in progress. You can see I usually start with like the front with the nose, and then I slowly work to the back. I plan out where everything needs to go. That's pretty normal. But how do you get even like to this point on, you know? And like usually it's difficult enough to boot up the game itself. It's one of those games where, at least for me, it's hard to get playing, but once I boot up the game, I don't stop for like 4 hours. That's just how I work, I guess. The same goes with like RPG games. I think it's difficult to boot them up, but once you have, it's really easy to stay playing for long. Some of the best games are like that, but some of the best games are kind of difficult to boot up, and that's something a lot of people struggle with, from what I've heard. So that's what you start with, and then you need to choose something to build. So if you want to build something from your imagination, I would recommend drawing it down on some paper, or in like GIMP or Paint, and then working off of that. So you can make like the general outline and like a front, and that way you can pre-plan what you're going to build. Because if you're just going to build a Trailmakers, it's going to lack the details at first, at least. Because that's just something that's really difficult to do. Just building something from your imagination, at least for me, it's really difficult. Like, some people are going to have less trouble with that. Yeah, I would get reference material, just a few pictures and stuff of what you're going to build. If you're going to be building a replica, what I would recommend is going straight onto like Sketchfab. So here you can see just a model of an Apache. It is paid, but you don't need to pay because you could just view it in here. And you can really accurately get all the shapes and stuff you need. Like, this is something that I still want to build. This is a little bird. I like helicopters. That's just how it is. But looking from this model, like, ooh, this one is actually really detailed. This is a very nice model. So, and if you have this, like, this is the ultimate reference, right? So you can see every little shape, every little detail, without ever really needing to Google reference images. Because if you use an image, you're just not going to get every single detail. Where here you can zoom out in and on it and stuff, and you can even see like the entire cockpit. They've already modeled the entire thing. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, you know. This is like an absolutely amazing trick. This is something I use so often, pretty much for all my builds at the moment. Yeah, I actually love this model. It looks really good. So, yeah, it even works for like non-military vehicles, as you can see. There's a ton out there. Oh, it's a motorcycle. Yeah, you can really see the details in the engine, right? Which, just going off of a picture, that's going to be much more difficult to interpret. You can also take a way better look at angles because you're not fixed from one position, so you can you get like better reference for it. Which angles is something I also want to talk about. A lot of beginner builds will have basically a lot of straight edges, right? If I go into my old builds, see, this is one of my most popular builds on the workshop actually. Let's use this. So the shapes on this aren't exactly accurate. Now, it's not like a bad build, and especially at the time, the standards were way lower. That's actually like something that has significantly changed the standards of what makes something a good build. This used to be a great build, at least in my opinion. It did really well in the workshop. It got like several thousand downloads, but yeah, you can just see it has a lot of straight edges. It's not very smooth, and well, it just doesn't look amazing in general. So, oh, the landing gear doesn't work anymore. Okay. So what you can do is you can use hinges in like these kind of positions. If you would have used a hinge, you could just have one straight line. And it would have looked a lot more accurate to the real thing. So if you look at this cockpit, without the hinges in here, this cockpit would have never really gotten this really nice shape. Because it's not 100% accurate, it's a bit longer because I needed to fit everything in there because this is mainly first person, right? But the angles of all the blocks are pretty accurate. And even this, because this is angled, it looks a lot better, especially from the inside. Yeah, using hinges makes a huge difference. Also here in the back, there are some holes here, which I could have filled those up, but yeah, complexity is... This is not even the best example. It's especially like in the cockpit, I use a ton of hinges. I was using even more, but I decided not to actually, because it was actually giving me some problems with the build. I had this entirely on hinges, but it was giving me a lot of issues, so I stopped doing that. One thing you do want to avoid is using too many hinges, because there comes a point where you have more hinges than normal blocks, and it just starts looking weird. It starts getting a lot of holes. That's just undesirable, right? We don't want a plane with a ton of holes. Like, this is probably the most I'll go myself when it comes to like holes and stuff, because these wings, I had a lot of trouble with these wings actually, making sure there wasn't any holes, but there, yeah, you can look right through them. Even this cockpit is like, there's a hinge over there, there's hinges over here, like this entire back piece is on a hinge. Yeah, also the hinges are also on hinges. There was someone who asked how I got the 2 block center in the 1 block center. This is how I did it. It's just 2 pistons. This one is on 0.17. Which puts it in the middle. That's another build trick that everyone should probably know about. Using a 1 block center for your builds is amazing. It's really good. Because you can get noses like this, and even for like cars, well, for like cars it's not as essential, I guess, because it's not ending in like a point. I do love to use a 1 block center for my tanks, but have a 2 block center for the middle, because there's a servo in here. And again, these are just on 0. Oh, these are on 16 instead of 17, but you get what I mean. It's pretty much the same. It works great for tanks too, 1 block center, because you could get like a nice cannon that looks good. What I do have to make sure is I want to shoot myself. See what happens. Huh. That was not the expected result. Okay. Yeah, you can also put a tank cannon in front of here, but that's something I decided not to do with this one. Yeah, 1 block center, it can help your builds a lot when it comes to detailing. Not every build, obviously, you want to go for details though. sometimes it's functionality over form, right? There's a good example of functionality over form with the thing I made for USE's video, the crazy bomber. It's not working great for me right now, but yeah, this thing looks absolutely horrible, but it works really well, usually. It's meant to work really well. Easier said than done. That's also something you have to decide. Do you want to have something that works really well? And this... Well, this one is kind of stupid, you know, but you also get, like, the builds that just look not great, but they work really well, and that sometimes, you know, the looks can go and ruin the function of a build, and you see that pretty often with my builds. Like, my jets are not as fast as jets should be. But if I were to make it as fast as the jet should be, like this one, that would be very difficult, and I would probably not get like the same amount of details as I would do, you know, making a slower build. I use some glitches to make it faster, usually, but I can only do so much. If we look at some builds. I would actually highly recommend doing that. This is... Oh, that's not the best example. Actually, let's look on this one. So you can see, actually, I have a ton of detached blocks that don't seem to be connected to anything. What they're doing is blocking the aerodynamics. So if I spawn this in, they're all gone now. But their aerodynamic properties are also gone. But the blocks behind it never actually got their aerodynamics calculated in, so it basically means that they don't have drag. It makes me go faster. This thing only has, I think, 4 dragon jets, and it's going 200 plus, and if I go in a straight line it could go almost 300, I think. Oh, it breaks it actually. That's purely because of the glitch. It's just a really useful thing to have. Because without it, detailed builds would basically be impossible. That's also something that I wish the devs would actually like implement as a feature instead of doing it like this. Because realistically, this thing shouldn't be needing this many engines in the first place, you know. But here we are. But once you have decided all of this and you have your references, how do you just start building away? Where do you start? That's always like a difficult thing to do. I would first start looking at your reference and being like, okay, how long do I want this creation to be? And then how long will, if you feel like building a plane, how long will the nose be in relation to that? And plan out a bit beforehand. Just go and like having some of these blocks, for example. Just going like, yeah, this is how long the plane is going to be. This is very short, but doesn't matter. This is going to be the nose, and this is going to be the cockpit. And then I'm going to start the wings over here, and then end them over here, for example, and go to have the tail, and so on. That way, you already know your proportions, you know what you need to work within, and that makes it a lot easier to get it right. You don't want to have your proportions off where your nose is too big for the rest of the plane, for example. It's something I see a lot. That it just makes your life a lot easier. You have something, you have like a goal, it makes it easier to get working on it. And if you look at your reference and you just start at like a starting point where you're like, oh yeah, I can make this part. I already know how I'm going to do this. You have like a creative idea with something like a hood block. That's something. It's actually like a really useful block for things like circles, because you can, while still having like an empty inside, you can do something like this. A little build trick for you. You know, you can have something like this. You like where you plan this out beforehand. You know, like, oh, I'm going to build it like that, and then if you start on that, and then start like building off of that, it becomes a lot easier to like visualize the entire build in the game. Another thing you have to look at is, you can see it on this build, the complexity of the vehicle. It is something to keep your eye on. If you're on PC, then there is a mod called the complexity mod. Would recommend using that. You can change it. So usually the default is 700, but I can change it to 5 million, like whatever high amounts I want, really. There isn't like a limit to how much complexity I can have, which is nice. If you're on console, then, well, too bad. Yeah, you do also need a pretty high-end PC to go over 700 complexity, by the way. Well, not especially high-end, but if you want to have multiple 700 plus creations in your map, you're going to need some computing power. There's just no way around it. Another thing I would recommend doing is playing with people like in servers. What I wouldn't do is join random servers. What I would do is like go to a Discord server for Trailmakers. Like go to my Discord server or USE's Discord server. Hop in like the voice chats there, and maybe there'll be like a server up you can join and make some new friends, because over there you're going to see the same people pretty consistently, right? So you can make some new friends and actually see them more often. Trailmaker's Discord server is also can also be used for that. I don't know. It's a lot bigger, which makes it a bit more random who's in call and who isn't. So one more thing, just before we get to logic. There is some quick keys for like rotating. If you hold left alt, it opens this up immediately. Instead of having to always click on that, this is so much faster. And you can use WASD to move blocks too, and just your mouse, because your mouse is always accurate. Multi-selecting is also a big part, and if you hold shift, you can if you hold control, you can select multiple parts without needing to like do this. So I could do it like this. I can also control double click to select all parts of the same kind. So if I had like 2 of these, I want to select them both, I could do this instead of having to do it manually. These are some tricks, you know, it gets you faster build flow, which is really important. So now onto logic. There's a few logic blocks. Let's just start with logic gates, right? So every like mechanical part or engine has this tab, and in this tab you can configure it. You can add like a control, like space. If we put a seat on this, then you can see down there it says it's on space. You can also power them using logic. So if I put like left mouse button here, I can both use space and left mouse button to trigger them. That's pretty much what an OR gate does. You can do a lot more with it. You can use it for like setting certain angles on hinges using the output. If I, for example, do something like this, have very low output, it's still going to work, but it's going to have a lot less force than when I use the spacebar. Which there's no visual output of that with the Dragon jets though. If we disable this for a moment, and then we add a control in the AND gate, what we can do is put the OR gate into the AND gate and the AND gate into a Dragon jet. And now if I press mouse 1, nothing happens anymore. But you can see that the AND gate is getting an input. If I press E, also nothing happens. But if I press mouse and E at the same time, it will activate. Now a quick thing with these, with the AND and the XOR gates, is that you can't use trigger toggles. So if I use E right now, it doesn't work. I don't know who decided this. It would be normal and logical. It's weird. Yeah, that's just what it is. You can use toggles in OR gate. So if I click this on and then press E, it'll work. but if I just press E, it doesn't. The XOR is pretty much the opposite of the AND gate, where if I give this a single input, so if I, let's put that on Q. So if I press a single input, it will activate, but if I also hold mouse 1 and give it a second input, actually that's still... Now it won't work unless there is one input. So just pressing mouse 1 will turn it on. Just pressing Q will turn it on. But if I press both, nothing happens. This can be really useful. Something you can also do is, if you don't want it to be on... if you don't want mouse 1 to actually trigger it, you can have 2 inputs on mouse 1 and 1 on Q. So only if you don't press mouse 1, Q will activate. So you know, you get like an if this then that system. That's kind of all there is to logic. It's pretty simple unless you want to do really complicated things, and then it will get a lot bigger and a lot more difficult. Yeah, I probably have some builds with like pretty crazy amounts of logic actually. The Apache actually has like a pretty crazy amount of logic, which it's pretty much hidden, but all of this is all logic. It's all logic gates, and there's more in there too. Like and this is for things like the rotors and different controls. It's also for these cannons to shoot at the right times, and yeah, it gets pretty complicated if you have enough. And you know, I have different systems in there. It's really interesting and something that's really worth learning, because you see a lot of players are afraid of logic. They think it's very complicated, which it can be. You gotta start somewhere, because it can really help you and your builds to be better. Yeah, you do need to, like, if you really want to get into the game, I would really recommend learning it. It's not essential, but if you know how it works and you can do a little bit with it, it's going to be much easier to get it right. So these are some of the basics of Trailmakers. I hope you enjoyed. I do have more tutorials. If you want something that goes more like into how to make something fly and like flight characteristics, there's a video somewhere on my channel from like 1.5 years, 2 years ago. I do also have the Jets in 30 minutes video, which is great if you want to learn how to start building jets. It's a bit out of date, and I do not cover a lot of things like hinges and stuff. Still like more beginner friendly in my opinion. The same goes kind of for the flight video, because I do not cover something like these forces. Those are some things that got recently added. Yeah, I would recommend checking those out if you are into airplanes. If not, then well, it's too bad. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have fun building away.